We're here in Portsmouth at the North Cemetery, and we're looking at Prince Whipple's headstone. And why this is important to Ona Marie Judd's story is because when she escapes the Washington household and she comes to Portsmouth, she would have come here to a network of African and African Americans who were part of this community, part of the story of the Underground Railroad. And that community, a community of Black folks that you would not think existed here in Portsmouth at that time.
When Ona Maria Judd arrived here, fleeing from George and Martha Washington's house of enslavement down in Philadelphia, about May 25th, 1790, she came into an extraordinary Black community. And someone she may have known right off the bat, and certainly probably knew his wife, was Prince Whipple. And you know, Prince Whipple is justly famous for having fought in the American Revolution and got his freedom in 1784, promised when he went to war in 1776 with William Whipple, who's a signer of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, that story of enslavement is America's story. It's interwoven.
Yeah.
You can't tell the Whipple's story without telling Prince's.
Yeah.
You know, you can't tell the Sherburne story without telling the story of enslavement. That's how they got their wealth, you know, and that's what the country was built on. So the proximity here is as much in death as in life, you know, where the stories are interwoven.
Ona Maria Judd comes in here, and clearly she knows the Langdon family, because Langdon's daughter Eliza was a good friend of Washington's granddaughter Nellie, and the Langdons visited the first family down in Philadelphia when Ona was there. And she may not have known him so well because he dies in 1797 and she's up here in 1796, but she certainly knew Dinah, his wife.
It's really remarkable when you start to think, and you think of these families and you think of the enslaved. So often we say that, you know, New Hampshire was the whitest one of the whitest states in the Union, and then you start looking at these stories and we're not all that white.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
There's lots of stories of Africans and African Americans that were integral to the formation and the growth of a state, you know.
Well, and Ona, I think that she really understood what the free Black community was about because of her experience down in Philadelphia. You know, clearly she knew the Reverend Richard Allen, who started the AME Church and also the African Society over there, which is a liberation society, and who had worked in Washington's house as a chimney sweep a month before Ona flees, and then was also a cobbler, and she had gone to buy shoes from him a week before she flees in May. So she knew, there was this network of freedom, and she gets in that ship and she comes up here, and these are the people who can help her in this community. Eliza Langdon has seen Ona walk in the streets of Portsmouth, and so the word goes down to Washington, we know where your slave is. He thought she had escaped with a Frenchman who made her pregnant, which is ridiculous. So he has a series of letters written up to Joseph Whipple, the president of the country, asking him to help him catch. So he goes to visit Ona and talk to her about, and as Washington encourages him to lie about what would happen to her if she went back. And so she kind of understands what this manipulation is, that how the white power structure is going to be used to try to get her back, either by persuasion or by force. And she would have had sources of intelligence. You know, I mean, later on they send up Burwell Vassal, to send him up here to try to kidnap her. And that's when she escapes to Greenland, because she knows this kidnapping plot is on. And she says, "Oh yes, I'll come on board. That's great." And then she's out of there over to the Jack's house.
I think that's like one of the fallacies that we often hear about the Underground Railroad, you know, that it was mostly New England abolitionists that ran this, but really, in fact, in Philadelphia, it was a real strong network of African Americans who were in charge of this Underground Railroad. And the other story I find really fascinating with Ona's story is how she escapes.
She knew in May that they were all going to move her back, you know, because the president's term was ending. They were going to move back to Mount Vernon, and she had learned because Eliza Custis is getting married to Jonathan Law that she's going to be a wedding gift to this despised and spoiled 15-year-old, and that does it. She says, "I will never be her slave," and she said they were packing to go to Mount Vernon. I was packing too.
Yep. And you know, here we have the president trying to present a face to the public of gradual emancipation. This is what I believe, but not when it comes to his own slaves. You know, his own. He wanted her back at all cost.
Says, I'm not going to have Ona taken to a judge. It'd be bad publicity.
Right.
I'm going to have her kidnapped and brought back. And he says on the letter, use every deceit necessary to lie to her. We're standing on the oldest black-owned piece of property in the state of New Hampshire.
Wow.
Because this property is still owned by the Jack family, who was here since the 1780s, had their home and their property here, and the descendants of the Jack family still own this property by state of New Hampshire law. So we consider...
Is that because they own the cemetery?
Yes, that no matter what happens to the family, how many times the land is sold around it, the cemetery remains the property of the family that is buried here.
Oh,
so this is, 2.5 centuries on, is still black-owned property.
All right.
So it says a lot about what the Jacks were all about too. Phyllis Jack was enslaved by the reverend of the local church, a man by Reverend Brackett, and she was freed in 1760. And that kind of fermented freedom around then. Yeah. And he gave her and then her husband Jack, who had served in the Revolution, but he didn't get his freedom until after he'd served in the Revolution. And Brackett gave them a small house that was here and some land. Their farmhouse, or their small house, was probably out here where the beaver swamp now is, and if that swamp ever drained down, it'd be possible to find the foundation to it. Ona Maria Judge fled out here the first time when there was that kidnapping plot by Joseph Whipple to trick her to going on to the ship. And so she first fled out here when he expected. She said, "I'll show up at the dock tomorrow." So she fled out here temporarily, and then that search ended. Joseph Whipple had enough of George Washington, and that search ended. So she went back and lived and married Jack Staines, and they were married in 1797, and then they had their first daughter Eliza in 1798, followed by a son William in 1800, and by another daughter Nancy in about 1802. So in 1799, when the Parke Custis estate decides that they're going to go after her again. He's out of office. He's gone. They're going to go after her. So this is when they send Burwell Bassett up here in October of 1799, and he stays over at the Langdon House. she comes out here to find refuge, and she finds this household of women. Phyllis Jack, whose grave marker, probably the top of this broken one here, and other members of the Jack family buried here. So she finds this household of women who are trying very hard to fight off poverty and to find living for themselves. And she joined the local church. She remarked that she didn't ever think George or Martha Washington ever really took their Christianity seriously. They might say the words of prayer, Martha might, but she didn't ever really mean them. And now she had found her place in the local church. Yeah, do you want to?
Also, too, the way they talked about the way they treated humans, other humans, and it's pretty much like what Harriet Wilson said. That the abolitionists would talk about freedom, but they wouldn't go and sit and have dinner with an African American. So it's that irony, that hypocrisy, that we want you free, but not that free. You're not really human.
And particularly, she would understand that there was a movement, the Come Outer movement, to try to get Christians to remove themselves from churches that supported slavery or were not actively against it. So I think she understood very much what her Christianity meant, and kind of calling the nation to a true Christianity too.
After all, we were built and still say we're a Christian nation, but we still do the same thing today, not valuing those black bodies.
When her two daughters died kind of in quick succession, I think it's 1828, 1832, the household really had fewer means to survive, and so she did, face some real hardship at the end of her life. But her story, I think, she wanted to bequeath to the future. And I think this burying ground says, enormous things. The Jack family, a free space, a home, landowning here, and a refuge against enslavement. And so here, but of course she was impoverished, so there's no money for a stone for her, so I think we, Ona or Eliza or Nancy and
all the girls.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting too. It speaks to the black community in Portsmouth, because Ona knew there was a safe place for her to go, as she escapes George, the slave catchers, and she comes here to Greenland, and you can imagine, the space back then, far away from the town, the bustling town of Portsmouth, a refuge, but also too, the land was not the land that Phyllis Jacks was given, was not producing land. It was, stones.
Swamp.
So swamp, not desirable land, where you could really make a living. So it would made it in such a way that freedom is not really free, because she had to, in order to live, depend upon the kindness of strangers, so to speak. So just think of that, it creates that foundational piece that's so often missing in our stories, the creation of family, the creation of building a home, creation of surviving it's like how we built the territories, right? The frontier. You go out and we tell those stories all the time. You stake your flag, you claim the land. But how much claiming did we have to do, and still, this is what's left. And so she gives 2 interviews at the end of her life and tells her story. That's how come we know so much more about her, because she granted these interviews, and we see that desire to tell the truth and tell their story. It's just, you all believe that this is the story, but no, here is my life, and I'm telling you the American story. you.